Hello everyone, how are you doing? So today we're moving into the second unit of your Foundations of Special and Inclusive Education. And moving forward, we will be linking in your previous activity, if you remember, about the narrative, right? Titled The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Well, that's of course written by Victor Hugo. And you have had various answers. Okay, you came up with words to summarize what you understood or what the narrative itself represents. And some of you would say it actually speaks about deprivation. It speaks about conflict. It speaks about love. It speaks about injustice. It speaks about how do you call this, discrimination, and so many other answers, which you later on connected, all right, into the theme, all right, that revolved around the narrative, okay, and you were able to come up with statements to further elaborate on your understanding of the entire flow of the story, okay. And today that is actually connected with addressing diversity through the years, all right, special and inclusive education. There you see it, through the years, okay. That phrase actually introduces to us the fact that diversity issues, okay, have long been a problem or have long been existing even before our consciousness has even entertained the fact that there is diversity and that there are concerns or issues or problems that actually needs address, okay. And even in our history, for that matter, in our history as Filipinos, there also have been cases or issues when these diversity issues have impacted, right, some of our historical figures. Well, you might be aware. I'm sure you guys are aware about one of our heroes. Okay, he was actually impaired, physically impaired, because he has polio, and so he was unable to walk. All right, that's Bonifacio. Okay, and if you were also to relate the Hunchback of Notre Dame to a segment in a Filipino, how do you call this, television, which came out, the Campanerang Cuba, right? They have similarities. And to sum it up all, if you may have watched already of these two and may have read about them, you would just realize that this ability, all right, is actually a source of fear and ridicule. You see what happened in the scenes and even in the transactions, because of that disability which you are born with or which you have developed with. Sometimes you really just do not have the confidence to get out of the world, to participate in the normal groups of people or with the normal groups of people, to do what the normal would do. And then eventually it doesn't stop there. You even if you already start isolating yourself, or perhaps you have already how do you call this, departed, all right, from friends or from groups of people, still you won't be able to avoid some sort of statements that try to undermine you, to ridicule you, or to even discount, okay, more of your disability. And that's just so sad, okay. It's just so sad that this is the way things are when it comes to issues on disability. And this is actually one of the issues, all right, embedded under diversity. Okay, we'll see further as we go through some other ways, okay, and even models in which we could further open our perspective to the ways we deal with such. So here are models, like I have said. Okay, what actually are the purposes of models? Why are they existing? Why do we have to have models of disability? All right, you know, they are actually critical or instrumental, all right, you know, because they serve several purposes, and one of which is they provide definitions of disability. In that case, we know how to categorize people, all right? We know exactly how to call them and to brand them when it comes to their particular disability, because the models would represent or would provide definitions. And they offer explanations of causal and responsibility attributions. So when you see someone who is actually struggling with his or her disability, these models, which we can see, would try to explain to us or to tell us what could have been the root cause of it, all right? Or which phenomenon, which event, which circumstance, okay, is responsible, all right? We could properly attribute the cause, the root cause, why such disability exists, or why such disability is into a person or is into groups of people, all right? So they are based on perceived needs. And yeah, because these models, before they have become models themselves, were actually first laid over by perceptions, okay, according to the needs of the people concerned. And of course, they inform policy. That's the beauty of having these models. You know, the way to address really issues in diversity is to come up with clear policies and standards to have fair and responsible way of dealing with different kinds of people, okay? All right, so they are not value neutral. When we say they are not value neutral, meaning to say there's fairness, okay? Because of these models, we get to address people on a fair level. We don't undervalue or overvalue groups, but instead, we treat everybody the same, okay? We accord or we attribute respect, responsibility, and policies or any programs for the welfare of everybody on same value, all right? We look at them at the same perspective, okay? So they define the academic disciplines that focus on disability. Definitely, the models will also provide to us avenues, okay, in which the concerned disciplines would try to address in their content and delivery, okay? They shape the self-identity of PWDs. Definitely, the models, first and foremost, are actually there, existing in order to help not just shape, but actually mold, okay, the identity of the PWDs. Because, you know, if your identity or your self-identity is that clear, regardless of what category it belongs to, so long as it is clear, okay, to the person himself or herself, then it's not gonna be a real deal of a problem, okay? And these models, of course, provide insight on how prejudices and discriminations occur. And given that, if they are able to provide insights, then definitely everybody of us, or the ones who would go along these models, would later on become more conscious, all right, would have more conscious effort of properly and accordingly dealing with different kinds of disabled people. And that later on, of course, would be a way to how do you call this, not necessarily totally erase, but at least diminish the number of cases occurring when it comes to discrimination or prejudices. All right. Okay, so here is the first model. That's the moral or religious model. Okay, we'll see what is in the moral or religious model. Okay, here the perspective is seeing the disability as either a blessing or a curse. Okay, look at that. It's either a blessing or a curse. You know, well, we couldn't avoid the fact that if we were to go back to what the Bible has in scriptures, okay, there were actually disabilities or sickness, diseases that were into people, okay, because they were products of sins. So they were consequences of sins. So that's curse, okay, in a word. And others, of course, would in the present time now, or in other perspective, they see it as a divine plan, and so it has a purpose and it's a blessing. Okay, so there are two ways to see disability in terms of the religious model. For example, parents who were born with children of disabilities during the age of the Renaissance and age of discovery were seen from within a spectrum where on one end God was punishing them for a sin that needed to be atoned, and at the other extreme he was blessing the family by giving a precious gift that they only could take care of or could take care for. And that's it. It's not just during those years, but even then, during the BC, before Christ, during the times when the Bible characters were still there and then alive, there are a lot of accounts that would tell about this model. Okay, well, if we might have family members who are also gifted with or have developed disabilities along the way, only us can tell what our disposition is about it or about that disability. When it comes to this model, it's either you counting it as a blessing for the family or you counting it as a curse because you might, or one of you in the family might have done something grave. Well, I don't know, but that's the model in simplest terms. Okay, so let's still look into what the model has. So in one strand of the model, disability is also equated with the sin. You see that? Evilness or spiritual ineptness of either the PWD or the PWD's family member. Look at that. We couldn't avoid but say in Filipino, well, most of us would say when especially when we know of someone who really has bad behavior or a really very cunning behavior, and then if it happens that that person has a family member with a disability, then we would say karma, or perhaps because of sin, because of evil spirits, because of his spiritual ineptness, you see. Or sometimes we would directly attribute it to the person himself who is a PWD or who has the disability. So that's actually in one strand of the model, alright? Such a belief can then cause not just the PWD's isolation. So here now is a consequence, alright? But also the exclusion of the entire family unit from communal events. In such a strand of the model, definitely it will cause a stigma on the part of the family or even the PWD himself or herself. You see, that already is the start or the door for isolation, when the family would no longer be participative or be present on community activities or events. They would try to run away, or perhaps stay on the corner just at their homes, because they received such a, how do you call this, an attribution when it comes to this strand. Okay, so that's according to Remerman 2013 as cited by Halal in 2020. That's actually the effect. So, but of course, on the other hand, for those who view disability as a blessing, okay, disability becomes one's ticket to heaven or an opportunity toward character development. This model is considered the oldest model of disability. Yeah, still referring to number one model on the religious model. You see that on account of those who have it and see it as a blessing, then definitely they look at it, or they count their disability as actually a way towards heavenly purpose or heavenly chances. Okay, and this further would mean an opportunity for them to develop more in character. That builds in them the humility, and even the how do you call this, the opportunity, okay, to get involved and to get understood as they try to understand what they are going through. Okay, now we have the biomedical or individual model. Okay, so we'll see what the biomedical or individual model has to say. So here, disability is seen as a medical problem that resides in the individual, all right? So it is a defect or failure of a bodily system, and as such, it is inherently abnormal and pathological. So when we say pathological, it could be of the nature of a mental or a physical disease, okay? So the goals of intervention are cure, okay? The reason why there's a medical intervention done in such a case is to help cure the disability, amelioration of the physical condition to the greatest extent possible, and rehabilitation. Okay, so the adjustment of the person with the disability to the condition and to the environment. So these two actually have the goal of letting the person adapt, okay, or letting the person accept to its extent, okay, the disability that he or she has, and do the necessary adjustments, okay, and the possible ways he or she could deal, okay, in order to fit into the condition and even to the environment that he needs to be with during the course of helping him or her out, rehabilitate, or at least get over from it. Okay, so persons with disabilities are expected to avail themselves of variety of services offered to them and to spend time in the role of patient or learner, being helped by trained professionals rather. So in here, the fact that you are disabled and it's pathological in nature, or it's inherently abnormal, that would mean there really is a necessity, okay, to welcome the expertise, okay, of professionals, because during rehabilitation and during some interventions aided or given to the patient, then definitely it may not necessarily or totally, how do you call this, overcome the disability, but it at least would give, okay, the person or the patient, okay, a way to recover gradually, or to at least adopt and adjust to the kind of disability and the condition and environment required of him or of her. All right. Okay, now we move forward to the functional or rehabilitation model. Don't get confused about the rehabilitation word here, as was mentioned earlier in our biomedical model. There are limitations and the limitations to the term. So here, it's quite familiar though with the biomedical model in a sense that it sees the PWD as having deficits. So in other words, there are like kakulangan. Okay, so these deficits then justify the need to undergo rehabilitative intervention such as therapies, counseling, and the like, in the aim of reintegrating the disabled into the society. So the goal here now is to make up for the lackings or the missing functionality of the individual. And the way to do this is to involve, all right, the patient or the disabled person, the PWD, into some therapeutical sessions or even counseling, okay, especially if this is mental deficit, okay, and even psychological deficits. You see, here there is actually a way in which the rehabilitation would involve, okay, the patient to get back to his normal, okay, but that definitely needs sessions in order to complete, okay, the cycle, and then eventually aid the person towards the society where he or she is fit belonging. Okay, so that's functional and rehabilitation model. So we'll see here the main difference in the two models in the concept of habilitation. Okay, so that you don't intertwine or you don't get confused with the concept. So in the biomedical model, it often suggests habilitation, okay? And this actually refers to the help given to those whose disabilities are congenital or manifested very early in life in order to maximize function. So the point here is as soon as the disability has already been identified at a very young age, okay, the habilitation is already being aided, okay, so that as early as that time, the function begins to be normalized, and then the maximum of which will not reach a later response. So meaning to say, the earlier, okay, the better it would yield in results. So that's the point of habilitation when it comes to the biomedical model. Whereas functional or rehabilitation model now refers to the assistance given by professionals to those who have an acquired, okay, look at this, an acquired disability in the hope of gaining back one's functionality. So here, this could be because of circumstances or instances that happened in the life of a patient or a PWD, which he did not or she did not necessarily have as early as the younger stages of his or her life, but actually had it just along the way, okay, because of experiences, because of some circumstances that happened. So the two models actually show how much society has placed value on convention, performance, and achievement. Meaning to say, if we look into the two models, we see here how valuable it is to aid, okay, as early as possible, and to perform, okay, on the disability as it is deemed important, or as it deemed necessary or arising. And then definitely achievement, like what have you done with the patient as soon as you were able to give aid, and when you have actually conducted sessions. Okay, so that's the biomedical and the functional or rehabilitation model in difference, and of course in what type of show they have towards the society. All right. So anyone whose performance does not fall within the norm of the population, look at this, is automatically deemed different and deficient. Okay. Of course, people who have who do not share with us normal functions, or at least some kind of may kakulangan, all right, there are some lacking functions that they should normally not have, then definitely they are automatically believed to be different, okay, and deficient. In living spaces, such persons were shunned by society. Well, of course, when it comes to human, particularly humans, no, in living spaces of the humans. These have been the case. These have been the case, yeah, when they were shunned because of being different or being deficient. But as we are going through a more emphatic and a more knowledgeable, more educated society, no, we tend to become more compassionate and more understanding and more welcoming to these kinds of people because yeah, like right now, this subject is definitely opening not just our minds to the basic know-how when it comes to dealing with them, but definitely it's also opening our hearts to possibilities and even avenues of being, fair with these humans because they are humans after all, like us. Okay, so in educational settings, such students were advised to transfer schools for a more specialized type of education. That's according to Clow and Corbett 2000. Well, definitely, we also have that in the Philippines. We have, special education programs or sections or classes where these kinds of people would go together, and then there are special treatments, or if they're rich enough, the family is rich enough and could afford therapists or even psychologists and special education teachers, then it could happen. How do you call this? Homeschooling could happen for them. In workplaces, they segregated or refused opportunities. So either way, both models constantly put the PWD at a disadvantage. Still referring, of course, to the biomedical and our rehabilitation model. Look at that. In workplaces, no, they segregated or refused opportunities. Well, definitely there would be instances when if you are confronted with a biomedical or a rehabilitative type of deficiency or disability, then you really have to say no to some task or even opportunities because of the limitations of your functions. Yeah, but look at this. Either way, both models constantly put the PWD at a disadvantage. Definitely, because of all the limiting factors and the conditions that patients would have under biomedical or a rehabilitation model, then definitely it's their disadvantage not to be involved or not to experience as others would experience. But it's okay. So long as the deficiency would be able to be gradually treated or aided, then that's okay. So they become easy targets of PT or recipients of charitable work. Moreover, both promote an expert-client type of relationship between the non-disabled and the disabled, where the PWD is automatically perceived as inferior. So here is another disadvantage when it comes to the two models, no? People with the obvious physical disability would sometimes be treated with charitable acts, okay? Syempre, you'd have the PT or the AWA immediately, okay? Triggered or how do you call this? Irked, and not necessarily irked in you or tickled in you, okay? And then that will eventually yield a response or an act of doing favor or at least becoming more humanitarian, okay? Yeah, in both models as well, expert-client type of relationship, definitely, because professionals like medical doctors, psychologists, therapists are people who are concerned usually with these types of models, with the disabled, of course. What else? Yeah, the PWD is automatically perceived as inferior when it comes to the model, definitely. However, at the extreme, this collaboration undermines the client's dignity by removing the ability to participate in the simplest everyday decisions affecting his or her life. yeah, at the extreme, this collaboration, okay, are referring to, of course, on the how do you call this, expert client type of relationship. So it undermines the client's dignity, okay, by removing the ability to participate in the simplest everyday decisions affecting his or her life. Because there is already an intervention by an expert. Sometimes the client would also have that feeling of limiting, okay, himself, the ability that he or she could possibly still have, because the therapy or the sessions, the psychological treatments, and even the medical treatments would actually really compromise on these aspects. Alright? That's according to Jan 2012. And next is the social model. That's the fourth. Okay. A Filipino born and raised in the United States who comes to the Philippines would most likely act more American than Filipino. Alright? Not because he resists his roots, but because of his exposure to Americans, not Filipinos. He may not have been raised this way. I'm sorry for the typographical error. Intentionally, okay? He may not have been raised this way intentionally, but constant interaction with others of a particular culture can strongly influence a person's way of life. That's actually a social model when it comes to people who are disabled, alright? Well, not it's technically disabled, because their usual functions when they were still in a particular culture no longer exist as their normal. And usually in diversity, discrimination happens here. Especially Filipinos, they would tend to be so judgmental towards cases like this and would say, nakaapak lang sa Amerika, pumunta lang hindi na alam ang pinanggalingan. People would brand them as if they no longer know their roots, or they no longer would turn back to where they came from, and would really emphasize on this as a, how do you call this, as if a makeup, as if a show. But definitely, the social model tells us that indeed there is a strong influence of exposure, okay, constant exposure to a culture that will later on be reflected in our ways much more if we have spent several years, okay, in that particular culture. So the underlying principle of the social model of disability is that it's a social construct. When we say social construct, you do not have a way of how do you call this, defending, because it's the people's thoughts that form or make up the judgment, right, or the disability. So it's kind of imposed on you because that's how majority of the people would see it, and it's a social construct. Okay, so the standards and limitations that society places on specific groups of people are what makes a person disabled. Okay, that's the truth behind the social model. So Clow and Corbett 2000 points out that the social or sociological model became a society's reaction to how the biomedical perspective viewed disability. So PWDs are seen as disabled not because they are deficient, okay, not because there are some lackings or some functions out from them or that are not visible in them as they act upon, but because the society just insists that they are deficient and disadvantaged. Norms, after all, are determined by the society, okay? Because many of our normal, how do you call this, experiences or normal participations are social construct, then the disadvantage of the social model is that it sees a person disabled depending on how the society brands him or her. Okay, no function is missing on that person, but just because the society treats or sees that that individual as disabled, then he or she is actually a PWD. All right, so that means to say that in diversity, disability as an issue does not just focus on a physical or a mental, how do you call this, scope, but definitely what the society brands people would also counter, how do you call this, would also rather be considered as a disability. Okay, so the social model reiterates that impairment should be seen as a normal aspect of life, and when it happens, it should not cause a stir. Instead, society must plan in anticipation of possible impairment occurrences so as not to disable anyone. This should be, okay, the case in that model. If disability were to be seen as something natural and expected, it could change the way we design our systems and our environments. So that's according to Kaplan, as cited in Halal and Others 2020. So the social model, of course, has this light of planning in anticipation of possible impairment occurrences so as not to disable anyone. That should be the case when we see, alright, impairment as a normal aspect of life. Because if it's a normal aspect of life, our tendency is to respond in a way that there already have been earlier ahead of time some interventions ready, okay, to aid and to even how do you call this, help, okay, in the overcoming of such disabilities. And the fifth one is the right-based model and twin track approach. So we'll see both. So the right-based model of disability is a framework that bears similarities with social model, although most practitioners see that the two as one, the two rather, see the two as one and the same. So that's Degener 2017, who argues they are nuances. Okay, so in here, the right-based model of disability would also be associated with the social model, where of course the how do you call this, the disabilities are created by the judgment or by social construct according to the society. And it must be an explanation because the right-based model offers, okay, a theoretical framework for disability policy that emphasizes the human dignity of PWDs. Well, it might sound very negative, but there's a movement behind, okay, the right-based model and even the social model, because what they want to move to how do you call this, what they want to achieve is that policies, if disabilities are ahead of time accepted as a normal part of life, then policies should by all means be laid already ahead of time. Okay, that's the movement. So the four key factors directly involved in such a model: the government as duty bearers. Okay, definitely what the how do you call this, what the right-based model and twin track approach, okay, twin track because it actually shares similarity with that of the social model, okay, is that the government needs to, okay, come up or craft policies and programs, okay, because they have a very integral part in addressing disability issues, okay, in the terms of diversity. Okay, the child as the rights holder. Okay, the child, of course, as early as the youngest age of any child for that matter, he or she is actually entitled of the right to become a participant of the community or of the society, whether normal or disabled. Okay, that's what the twin track approach would want us to remember. Okay, and the parents, not only as duty bearers but also as representatives of the child. Definitely in the twin track approach, or in the rights based model, the responsibility of the parent is not only to look after, okay, the welfare of the child, but definitely to represent the child, especially if the child is confronted with a disability. Okay, the teachers as right holders and duty bearers. Okay, teachers as well are confronted with disability issues, but okay, they should not just enjoy the luxury of having the rights to be treated fairly and squarely, but also as duty bearers. Okay, so that in the event that they have the disability, they know exactly well how to present themselves, okay, in front of a group of learners, and then definitely become more responsible and accountable of their actions, especially in teaching the children or the students the beauty and the wisdom there is in respecting and even in treating well people with disabilities. Okay, so yeah, I think this is the end of the models, all right, of disability, and I hope that you can have enrichment of this particular lesson, which you may want to share in your video reflections. All right, so goodbye and God bless everybody.